The cabin was quiet at 30,000 feet when a single accusation changed everything. A young black girl, traveling alone and clutching her boarding pass, became the center of a storm she never saw coming. A pilot's voice cut through the comm, labeling her a threat, and in that moment, fear replaced trust. Passengers watched, unsure. The crew hesitated, and the girl's world narrowed to flashing lights, tight rules, and the heavy weight of being judged before being heard. This story isn't just about a flight gone wrong. It's about power, prejudice, and how quickly authority can be misused when compassion disappears. As the plane continued its journey, decisions were made that would leave lasting scars, raising questions about safety, discrimination, and who gets protected in moments of crisis. What no one on board knew was that this child was not as alone as she seemed, far beyond the runway. Her father was watching systems, not skies. A billionaire who built his life on control and precision was about to learn what happened to his daughter in the air, and when he did, the course of that flight and many lives tied to it was about to change in ways no one expected. The girl's name was Aaliyah, and she was only 12. She had been taught to follow rules, keep her hands visible, and stay quiet when adults spoke sharply. That day, she did everything right. She sat straight in her seat, answered questions softly, and tried not to cry as the tension around her grew. Still, the word threat lingered in the air, heavier than the plane itself. Some passengers looked away. Others whispered. No one truly stepped in. The pilot insisted it was about flight safety, about protocol, about instincts. But those instincts seemed shaped by something deeper, something unspoken. Aaliyah's small backpack was searched. Her phone was taken. Each action made her feel smaller, more invisible, even as all eyes stayed on her. The crew followed orders, unsure where the line between caution and cruelty had been crossed. On the ground, her father's world was built on data, risk management, and accountability. He monitored investments the way others watched weather patterns. When an alert flagged an unusual incident tied to his daughter's flight, he didn't panic. He listened. He replayed. He asked quiet questions that demanded honest answers. Back in the sky, the flight moved forward, but the air was thick with doubt. And with every passing minute, the distance between what happened on board and the consequences waiting on the ground grew. Dangerously smaller. As the flight pushed through clouds, the mood inside the cabin grew heavier. Aaliyah felt every bump of turbulence like a warning. She noticed a flight attendant nearby who kept glancing at her with concern, clearly uncomfortable but afraid to challenge the pilot's authority. That quiet tension became its own conflict, showing how rules can silence even those who want to do the right thing. Nearby, a mother squeezed her son's hand, watching closely, as if realizing how easily this situation could happen to any child. The pilot stayed behind the cockpit door, confident in his call, documenting the incident as a security measure. To him, it was procedure. To others, it felt like a line had been crossed. The captain's log filled with words that could shape the narrative long before the plane ever landed. Meanwhile, whispers spread among passengers, some defending caution, others questioning why fear seemed to have chosen a child as its target. On the ground, Aaliyah's father connected pieces that didn't sit right. Flight data, crew names, internal reports, everything pointed to a story forming without his daughter's voice. He knew how quickly public perception could be shaped by authority and paperwork. As the plane descended toward its destination, two truths moved closer together: what really happened in the air, and what the world was about to be told. As the plane began its final descent, the tension reached a breaking point. Aaliyah could feel the change in the air, not just from the engines slowing, but from the people around her, realizing this moment wouldn't simply fade once the wheels touched the ground. A quiet announcement reminded everyone to stay seated, but eyes kept drifting toward her row. The same label still hung over her, unchallenged, shaping how she was seen. The flight attendant finally knelt beside her, whispering that things would be okay, though her voice shook. It wasn't reassurance Aaliyah needed anymore. It was fairness. She stared out the window, wondering how a simple trip had turned into something that felt so public and so wrong. Somewhere in the cabin, a passenger discreetly recorded notes, already thinking about what would happen after landing. On the ground, her father was no longer just reviewing information. Calls were being placed, legal teams were alerted, aviation authorities were quietly looped in. He wasn't angry yet. He was focused. He understood timing, and he understood leverage. Every second mattered, as the runway lights came into view. The pilot prepared his final report, confident it would protect him, but he didn't know that the story he controlled in the sky was about to meet a much larger force on the ground. And once those doors opened, there would be no turning back. The moment the plane taxied to the gate, something unexpected shifted. Before the seatbelt sign even turned off, a message reached the cabin crew through their internal system. It wasn't from airport security or airline ops. It was from corporate headquarters. A request for everyone involved to pause, document nothing further, and wait. The pilot frowned, reading it twice, unaware that the same message was being forwarded to regulators and legal teams at the same time. Aaliyah noticed the change immediately. The confidence she'd felt pressing down on her all flight began to crack. The flight attendant, who had been silent earlier, now stood straighter, asking careful questions, choosing words with new caution. A passenger across the aisle quietly mentioned that the airline's largest private shareholder was known for stepping in when lines were crossed. No one said the name out loud, but the tension spiked. On the ground, her father had just made one move public. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to trigger internal alarms. A single call confirmed his identity to the airline's board, tying the incident to a child they could no longer dismiss as anonymous. As airport staff gathered outside the aircraft door, the pilot realized control was slipping. The report he trusted might not be the final word, and for the first time since takeoff, uncertainty replaced authority. When the aircraft door finally opened, the silence was louder than any announcement. Airport officials stepped inside, not rushing, not accusing, but firm. The pilot was asked to step out of the cockpit and speak privately. His report was already being compared against passenger statements, crew messages, and cabin data. The story he believed would shield him began to fall apart. Line by line, Aaliyah was escorted off the plane by a senior airline representative who knelt to meet her eyes and apologized. Not as a script, but as a human being. Passengers watched as the label placed on her dissolved, replaced by an uncomfortable truth about bias and misuse of authority. The flight attendant, who had hesitated earlier, finally spoke up, confirming what she saw. Others followed. The conflict that lived in whispers now had voices. Outside the terminal, her father waited, calm but unmistakable. His presence alone shifted the tone. Investigations were launched. The pilot was relieved of duty pending review. Policies were questioned. Accountability moved fast. Then came the twist. Instead of a lawsuit or public spectacle, her father requested something unexpected. A full, transparent review made public, with Olia's voice included. Not revenge, but change. And as cameras staved off, one thing became clear: this story wasn't ending with punishment, but with a reckoning far bigger than one flight. In the weeks that followed, the airline kept its promise. A full investigation was released to the public, detailing what went wrong and how fear had replaced judgment. New training programs were announced, focused on airline safety, bias awareness, and accountability. The pilot's case moved through proper review channels. No shortcuts, no cut. It wasn't about destroying a career, but about making sure power was never used carelessly again. Aaliyah returned to school quietly, carrying more strength than she realized. She spoke during the review, her words simple but clear, reminding adults how their actions feel to a child. Her voice became part of the change, not a footnote. Passengers from the flight reached out with messages of support, some admitting they wished they had spoken sooner. Her father stepped back into the background, satisfied that transparency mattered more than headlines. He didn't need the world to know his name, he needed the system to listen, and this time, it did. The story spread not as a scandal, but as a lesson, about discrimination hidden behind procedure, about courage showing up late, but still counting, and about how real justice isn't loud revenge, but lasting change that protects the next child before a label ever has the chance to form.